Yeah, so fantastic film, beautiful, beautiful craft. Um, my first question would be: are there any? It's a brilliant story, absolutely, almost had me in tears. Were there any particularly poignant moments in the story that were important for you to convey?
Well, I mean, all of the story is important to convey in a broad sense, but I mean, I guess if you mean, is there any favourites, perhaps, which we definitely have those. I mean, I think we both really love the Nagasaki flashback sequence, which initially we didn't quite know how to do, and we had various ways that were way too tricksy. We thought of doing, we had the ink drop idea from the beginning, but we had a thought of doing it where the ink drop would go into the bowl of water, and then the ink would spread out and start making shapes in a sort of 3D particle system kind of way, and then you'd see the sort of backstory of the Nagasaki thing in sort of ink in the water. We just thought this is that's ridiculously tricksy and complicated, and the obvious answer is right in front of our face. Kensuke does the paintings. Why don't the paintings just come to life in his mind, you know? So that's what we did, and it was far more effective to do that. And then we ended up thinking, okay, well, actually the ink drop could then be the bomb drop. So even though the answer is right in front of your face, it takes ages to get there sometimes, and the ink drop being the bomb was much better idea. So we're really pleased with how that sequence came out.
I'd say my one thing, and some people spot it and some people don't, and it's there, but the one thing that always touches me is if you notice during that Nagasaki sequence when young Kensuke is saying goodbye to his son runs up to hug him and he kind of pushes him away because he's very formal. I mean, we had a Japanese consultant and he said there wouldn't have been a lot of touchy feeliness back then, so he sort of pushes his son away. And then of course you set that up so that later on when Michael runs to him and hugs him, there's that moment of pause, like, and then he realizes he finally can have the hug with his surrogate son, you know, and then Stuart puts that lovely climax of music in there as his hands go around. I think that always brings a tear to my eye still, even on the 9,000th viewing.
You mentioned music there. What was your particular approach to the music in the film?
Well, there's an awful lot of music in the film. The film's 84 minutes long, and there's about 74 minutes of music, so it's almost like a musical in some sense. But that was one of the things that Neil and I wanted to do. Well, actually, when we first read the screenplay, when Sarah Radcliffe, the producer, sort of sent us the screenplay and asked us would we want to do this, what Frank Cottrell Boyce had done with it was to, unlike the book, I don't know, how many people have read the book in the audience? A few. Okay, well, in the book, Kensuke can speak a little bit of English, so they can communicate. And then Frank decided, well, let's just get rid of that idea and have them have no common language. So, which is a great idea because it reiterated the themes of the piece, which was, you know, how do you connect with somebody when you have no common language, and you know, all the creatures on the island, including Michael and Kensuke, have no common language, and they've got to find another way to connect, which is sort of one of the themes. And that idea of not having Kensuke speak English sort of reiterated that powerfully. But for me and Neil as filmmakers, what we liked about having the no language was a great opportunity for silent filmmaking, you know. So, you know, like in the 1920s, we don't have any dialogue because there's no recorded talking yet. So they would always have somebody play the piano or an organ. So you always have music in silent films, but never dialogue. And those kind of things, you know, that sort of set up the language of cinema that people like Hitchcock and so on would run with later on, where they wouldn't put a lot of dialogue in their films, even though the talkies had already happened, but they would use, you know, cinematic storytelling, where you use blocking and editing and sound design and music to tell the story, not people just telling you what's going on in the story. And we always like that because it sort of involves the audience. The audience have to become a bit more of a detective and work out what's going on, so it draws them in a bit. And those are the kind of movies that me and Neil like watching as well. So,
and just to add very quickly that Kirk and I both worked with Stuart Hancock before. He'd done a short film I'd done before, for example, called The Last Bell. So we had a working relationship. And most movies you see in the cinema, they film them, they edit them, and then like in about 6 weeks or so, they wheel in a composer and they sort of glue music over the top of the film at the end. It's quite a frustrating process for a lot of composers. We didn't want to do that, so from day one of doing character designs and storyboards and figuring out the story, we brought Stuart in because we wanted music to be an integral part of the storytelling process. And so we'd show Stuart our drawings and our ideas for sequences and our storyboards, and he'd go off and say, this suggests this maybe, and he'd write something on a piano and send it, or a synthesizer, and send it back to us, and then we'd listen to that, and then that would inspire us visually, just listening to that music. So it's like this, the music and picture developed from day one on this film. So it's sort of like a musical, isn't it? It's a musical without singing, really.
Brilliant. You kind of visualize different kind of layers intertwined there. There are lots of different kind of techniques going on in the film. You've got the fantastic Nagasaki sequence and it's 2D animation, but you have kind of photographic elements in there. Can you talk a bit about the kind of techniques and the craft and layering approach to that?
Well, I guess the stylistic look of the film in terms of the backgrounds was started because we wanted the island. We felt the island needed to be a character in itself, and therefore needed enough detail so that it would, the audience could feel like they were really in the island, so that it would be sort of transformative for the audience as much as it is for Michael in the story. So we knew we needed a bit more detail than you'd normally get in an animated film. And Neil and I are big fans of matte paintings from the Hollywood and British sort of mid-20th century movie history, which is where, if you need to do what now would be like a 3D or digital extension of a set, they used to just paint it, and they get these amazing painters who would paint with incredible detail, so it was almost photorealistic, but it was never quite photorealistic, and that's actually what we like, that sort of artifice that has a theatricality about it. So that was our sort of starting point for how detailed the island and the film in general might look. And of course, we're on a relatively low budget. It's an independent film, so we had to work out techniques of how can we do that quickly, because there's 1,200 shots in the film, and there's never enough time to do all that work. So you got to find, can you use technology to get some shortcuts? So our art director Mike Shorten sort of came up with a technique that blended. We started off with what's called photo bashing, so you get photographs of, say, trees and flora, and then you'd make black and white versions of that with photographs, and then you get people to come in and do a color pass over it, and then also do a stylization of the photographs in Photoshop that just makes it look a bit more graphic. And then the last layer would be people coming in and hand painting over the top where it needed it, and you'd put the sort of detail where the eye was, and you wouldn't spend labor on the place. You're trying to draw the eye in each shot somewhere, and then you don't bother putting the detail where the eye isn't going. So that sort of was an effective way of getting a lot of detail, making them look like they were hand painted, but it was a bit of a cheat, really. But it was effective and worked for the schedule. And then what else? We've got some 3D sequences in there, and there's the travel log sequence when you see the line going across the map, and that's a mixture of 3D and 2D. But we was kind of like breaking out of one particular style to give the audience's eye a rest, so that when you go back to the main style, it feels fresh again. But also just as a little bit of a stylistic narrative thing, and it's always nice to be able to mix things up a bit.
Yeah, really sort of those photographic backgrounds really kind of help to kind of put it into the ginormous space that the sense of them being lost alone, and then this gigantic kind of environment that they're in. So you mentioned an independent animated feature. There aren't many of those made. It's quite difficult to do those sort of things. So were there any, I'm sure, lots of challenges that you faced in the making of it? Were there any of those challenges that you're particularly proud of?
Regardless of being kind of the budget or being independent, I think one of the things I'm most proud of, or that we're most proud of, is that in a film that's 84 minutes long, including credits, you hopefully feel at the end of it that you've been on this island quite a long time and seen a relationship build, and then for them to say goodbye, for that goodbye to work. And when Kirk and I do, so I'm sure you kind of mostly know a little about animation, but you do a storyboard. Before you do any animation, you do a storyboard, like a comic strip version without the speech balloons, black and white drawings, very simple line drawings. And you film them and put them on a timeline and put rough sound effects from a sound effects library and not the real actors yet doing voices, and music from other movies. And you kind of cobble together a sense of what the movie might be like with no animation, no color yet. And we did that, and we got the whole film down on a timeline, and we showed it to everyone, and it was you felt like Michael had been on the island for a weekend if you were lucky. I mean, it really didn't feel like he'd been there for long, and we were quite dispirited about it for a while, for the weekend. And then we kind of thought, okay, come on, let's fix this, let's think about this. So we went back in and created some new sequences, but we also started putting in little kind of tricks, you could call them, but things like, we would say, okay, this happens at dawn, so the next thing happens in the evening, and the next thing will be dawn again, and then day, and so on. So that we were staging, what time these sequences were taking place. So in the back of your head, you're aware of days going by. And then, of course, came up with a sequence where at the end, you see there were Michael and Kensuke are planting a seed, and then the seed grows, and then it becomes a flower, and then they pick it, and all this kind of thing. So we had to go through and put all that kind of stuff into the basic structure we had, so that at the end, thank God, when we showed it, and we'd fixed it, everyone felt, I don't know how long you feel, but to me it feels like he's been on the island a good 6 or 7 months at least before he's picked up. So that was hard to do that in an 84-minute film, make it feel like that much time was hard, and I'm quite proud of that.
Yeah, I think actually I hadn't thought about that, because for me, watching it, I definitely feel the duration of the time he's there. And I wondered to myself when I saw the family boat there, how long has it been? And for me, it felt like at least a year. So I think you've definitely succeeded there.
Better than our original Lost Weekend.
We were going to have his hair grow long and his skin get really tanned, but in the end it was just, there was again, the budget limited that. We didn't have enough time for designing the hair and getting animators to change the style, and so we actually just had the seasons change, and as Neil said, the plant grow, and it kind of worked. But
yeah, because we figured that Kensuke keeps his beard nice and trim, right? So you don't see it, but he must have a pair of scissors or something. He's made out of bamboo that they adjust their hair to.
I was thinking that lots of technical things like that. How do where's the plumbing, and where does it go when it's not being poured out? So
we know where his toilet is in the treehouse, because we did figure that, but you don't get to see it.
Yeah, there were those kind of technical things I did think about, but yeah, you go with it. It's brilliantly well done. A question I can't not ask. I think maybe everybody wants to know. It's hand drawn or 2D. How many frames are there in that film? Can you work it out on the spot? 84 minutes times.
Any young people here who are maths geniuses? You? Fantastic. Okay, there's 24 frames a second for film, but we kind of draw every other frame. So 12 drawings a second times 60 for a minute times 84. So 12 times...
24 times...
60 times 84.
Yeah.
Anybody got a calculator on their phone?
Yeah,
Shall we just
this one?
So we just say it's a lot. It's a lot of drawings, and of course that applies to every character, because if you have 10 characters in the scene, they've all got to be drawn that number of times. Plus, there are a bunch of drawings you don't see, which are the design drawings and all that kind of stuff that get us to the final image. So, gosh, I mean, what are we talking about? 300,000-400,000 drawings, I'm sure, by the end of production are done.
So it's a huge achievement. Questions?
This isn't a question, but 12 times.
Yay.
12 times 60 times 84 is 60,480.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Per character.
Ray, I think let's not forget the multiple layers. That there are lots of layers, so there's going to be a lot more than that.
Put it this way, when Kirk and I started this film, we were about 10 years old. So it just takes a long time.
Any other questions from the audience? Behind.
How did you make the movie?
How? A little bit of magic, lots of hard work. Have you ever done a flick book? Like a little flip book when you're bored at school, not listening to the teacher? Do you ever do a little... Oh, you're a good person. You're never bored. Do you know what? It's no more complicated than a little flick book like I used to do when I was bored in geography, probably, but in colour. That's what it is. Lots and lots of drawings.
Hello. Have you got an app that a young person could use to get into animation? Is there anything to recommend? I mean, obviously flipbooks are brilliant, but something a step between?
Do you know what? I'm not very up to date on what there must be some. I can't recommend anything, but there are things that can. There's certainly things where you can do stop motion, so like plasticine models and capture that and get a sense of timing and so on. So I guess you could set that up to photograph drawings, but you probably want something where you can draw. I'm not the best person. I'm terribly technophobic. So, but there are definitely things, and of course it's a cliche to say it, but for when we started out, when I was making films as a teenager, it was Super 8. I mean, it's prehistoric, so it would be like £8 or something for a reel of film even then, and it was 2 minutes and it was silent, and you had to post it off and wait a week to come back, and then you put it in your projector and the projector ate it and tore it up. So you can, obviously with a phone and free editing software, you can do a cinema resolution film in your bedroom. I mean, it's the cliche to say it, but you can. So have a hunt around. You can definitely do stuff.
I think there are a lot of how to animate apps around there, so just kind of dig around, and they're quite straightforward.
Start with paper. Paper's still good. Corner of a book.
And a pencil.
There's lots of questions up there.
Step away from your phone.
How did the emotions change throughout the film?
Good question.
How do you think the emotions change throughout the film?
I think I've read the book before, and I feel like when Michael was happy throughout the first quarter of the book, in the middle, he didn't quite understand. He was quite cautious of what was happening around the island. And at the end, he felt more happy, more used to being on this island. But straight after that, his parents came home and it was fine.
Well, it's true. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I was dumped on a desert island, I'd be useless. I mean, you might be better than me, but I'm an urban person. I've grown up in London all my life. So finding water and finding food, I would be as useless as Michael was. But I tell you one thing we did, I don't know, one thing that was important to us, for all the young people out there, particularly, when you see these sorts of stories, quite often it's the old, wise person teaching the young person, like a teacher. And that does happen in the film. Kensuke does teach Michael, but it was important to us that Michael teaches Kensuke as well, and that he learned something from the young person, which frees him up emotionally and stops him being misanthropic, stops him hating mankind so much. It opens his heart up. So I always love that. I like the fact that they teach each other. I think that's a really nice, sweet message.
Since Michael taught Kensuke how to speak English.
Yeah.
Yes. And Kensuke taught him how to survive on this island. There's a mixed friendship between them throughout the middle of the book.
That's right. And Michael gives Kensuke the chance to be the dad he kind of never was before, because he lost his family.
And there's a very lovely moment in the film where Kensuke sees the Peggy Sue on the balcony, and then he has to make the decision whether he's really going to go and light the beacon or keep his son for himself. But then he realizes, and this is kind of a key part for us when we were developing the story, was that, I guess every parent is preparing their child to leave, so for Kensuke to really fulfill his parental duty, he has to push him out into the world. So that's why he makes that decision, even though obviously it's, breaking his little heart. But so when you saw the ending of the film, did you find it happy or sad?
It was quite emotional at the end, but for Kensuke, it was quite different to how it was for Michael, because Michael was really happy, but he didn't want to leave Kensuke as well. And when Kensuke had managed to leave Michael and Michael went home to his family, that's where you realise that Kensuke's feelings are going to change, because in the book, I remember, it said, don't tell anyone about this until 10 years later.
So do you think Michael was happy or sad to leave the island?
Both.
So what's that?
Good answer.
That's called bittersweet, which
Yeah.
is what we were aiming for. You don't see many bittersweet endings. They're always pretty good.
What inspired you of making this film? What
Well-
inspired you of making this film?
Well,
What's your inspiration?
yeah, that's a good question. Well, there was two things. Well, there's two areas really. One of them is obviously the source material. So Michael Morpurgo's book, which was it's such a great book, and Michael Morpurgo is very, very supportive of us, and he allowed us to run with his story and change it essentially. I think he understands from when Warhorse was made into the play that the best adaptations are not necessarily the ones that are exactly faithful to the source material. You've got to change it, and they're the more interesting ones. I mean, another couple of things off the top of my head would be, what Paul King and Simon Farnaby did with Paddington, which is really quite radically reinvent Paddington from the book, and then Walt Disney with Mary Poppins is very different than Pamela Travers' book. So I think, you should never really try to be too faithful to the source material, and you should really try and run with it in a different way, and you generally need to anyway with films. So Michael's source material with all of its terrific themes was a great inspiration to us, but also just in terms of filmmakers, all the things we sort of loved growing up, and even discovered as adults just on a purely cinematic level. Powell and Pressburger are sort of British 40s filmmakers who are very imaginative, but of course also when we were young we watched E.T. and King Kong and The Golden Voyage of Sinbad and all these things that sort of put into our imagination the magic of the movies. So we were sort of feeding on all of those inspirations, as you do anyway. When you're growing up, you always go back to things that reached you when you were young. So
which hopefully means if you like this movie and somebody goes off and makes a movie and becomes a filmmaker or a writer in 10, 20 years' time, maybe this film might influence you. I don't know.
Why did you want to make this film?
Because we were bored. We had nothing else to do.
Pay the bills.
Because it's such a... This film, we genuinely feel, is a rare beast in that... So we've seen it in a lot of countries now. A lot of countries the film has opened or been in festivals. And we've seen audiences of like really old people, like grandparents coming in on walking sticks, and little kids and all the ages in between, teenagers and middle-aged parents and everything. And we still get tears and everyone reacts. And it doesn't matter what culture it goes to, be it South Korea or Paris or London, people still seem to react. So having this kind of a lovely story that seems to cross all cultures and ages is a great thing, with a terrific message, like an important message about the environment in it, and an adventure story. I mean, how many scripts do you get that have all that? You have an adventure story, but it's sort of brainless and isn't saying anything, or you have a message movie, but it's a little bit dull maybe. This seemed to have everything, so we were incredibly lucky to be able to direct the film version of this.
Why did you choose like this style of animation?
That's a good question. It was discussed, at the beginning, do we do this 2D hand-drawn or do we do it 3D? But we always found that whilst 3D is very popular in the last 20 years and it's kind of become the default for animation, you need a big budget to make it look any good, because 3D doesn't look very good if you've got a low budget. And also we kind of found the characters in 3D a bit hard to connect with, and there's some sort of magic in hand-drawn things that I think you just sort of suspend your disbelief immediately, and you connect with it. So the sort of magical thing, I guess it's connecting to the illustrations you see when you're younger, but also there's some sort of primal thing about drawing that goes back to it's along with language as our earliest form of expression, back to cave paintings and what have you. So there's something we all connect very strongly with drawings, I think. So we've always liked it.
I mean, it sounds sentimental, but when you work with animators and artists and background painters, it is from the heart down their fingertips to the tip of the pencil. It's that there are no levels of technology and stuff and lighting and rigging and all that. It is straight from the heart to the paper, which I think is lovely, and of course is reiterated in the theme of the film, which is that both Michael and Kensuke draw. And because they can't share a language, what they do is they draw for each other, and then in the end you see them sharing the drawing of what they're going through. So it seemed nice to actually draw the film as well, to keep on that message.
To carry on the theme of drawing, I didn't know this book. I loved it. And I do cartoon diaries about my life, not just the happy things, the sad things, the flood from upstairs, etc. And I loved seeing the drawings of both Kensuke and Michael in the logbook. And I really hope this film will inspire younger people to do cartoon diaries. It's a lovely record of things that happen to you.
I think you're right. I have a friend who draws people's weddings, and she hires herself out. And when you look at the sketches, to me, there's something more special about having drawings of the day and what was going on than actually just having bog standard photographs. Photographs are very, I mean, I love photographs, but they're very surface. But somebody actually sketching and the gestures and the feelings of the people, I think is lovely. So fantastic. I mean, that sounds brilliant. I love the idea of what you're doing.
What gave you the idea of Senkute speaking a different language?
Well, that was, he's speaking his own language, Japanese, but that was Frank Cottrell Boyce, the screenwriter's idea, to keep Kensuke just speaking Japanese, keep Michael just speaking English, and therefore they got to find another way to communicate, which became illustration, just sharing time together without speaking. You can just, spend time with somebody doing things, and that's another form of communication. So yeah.
Because we didn't want to get into a situation where you have somebody speaking broken English. It works in the book, Kensuke speaking English, because you're hearing it in a different way in your head. But if you actually heard on screen, me feel sad, me got wet in my eye, that kind of thing, it's all a bit, yeah. So yeah, we chose not to have the language in there and just do it visually.
How much did it cost?
Future financier.
Yeah.
We're taking your name for when you're a bit older.
It was £9 million.
Dumbstruck.
Well, the scary thing is that's low budget for animation.
If you go see a Pixar movie, like whatever the last one was, they'll be around about 200 million.
And then another 200 million on marketing on top of that.
So it took 10 million because Kirk's 4 million, I'm 4 million, and then with the loose change we just paid the artists with that. No, I'm kidding. We didn't.
Okay, you're spending my budget for me. What was your favourite part of the movie?
Well, I really like the Nagasaki sequence, but I also really like the goodbye sequence at the end, which is that was the one we worked longest on to get right, and I think we storyboarded that and cut it into an animatic, which is when you put the storyboards on a timeline and put temporary sound, music, and dialogue on it. That took us about 12 weeks to do because there was so many beats it needed to hit, and it sort of ebb and flow of it. The beginning of it is Kensuke's controlling the situation, and he's already made it. From the time he decided to grab his stick up in the treehouse, he's made his decision that okay, Michael's going to go. Michael doesn't know he's going yet, so the first half of the goodbye sequence is Kensuke driving it, saying goodbye to sayonara to Stella, and Michael still doesn't quite. The penny hasn't dropped for Michael yet. What's happening? And then at the point where Michael runs down the hill and gives Kensuke the hug, and then starts backing away from him up the hill, that's when Michael takes control, of the goodbye. And then the final thing he does is sort of to show that he's grown up is a little bow he does to Kensuke. And Stuart had a piece of music that sort of changed key around that moment, but it wasn't on the bow. And we said, maybe it'd be good to put the to put the key change on the bow. So when he goes down, it's in one key, and when he comes up, it's in another key, and that sort of reiterates his maturity at that moment. And then he just backs off down the hill with Stella, and so getting that right took ages, and but we're really quite pleased with how that works.
I've got a favourite sequence for personal reasons, because if you remember the logbook sequence, which fills up with Michael's drawings, Kirk and I have we hate when you have very, very talented, classically trained animators that are terrific at drawing, and they fake doing children's drawings, naive drawings. They're fake, naive drawings. And we didn't want to do that. And I said, well, I've got 3 kids, and they're more or less the right age, and they're entirely free. But bar the occasional bit of chocolate just to keep them going. So I got my 3 kids drawing all those things you see in the logbook, which pass by in a few seconds. But if you freeze frame the future Blu-ray release, you can stop on them, and each little, albatross and so on has a little. It's Michael's homeschooling, so it has a little thing written underneath it, and all those pages are genuinely drawn. So just having my kids involved in drawing that was sort of, as they watched my rapidly balding, greying head at the drawing board over the years, getting them actually involved with the film was lovely. So it's nice for me to watch that sequence.
I think we have time for one more question.
How long did it take to make?
That's a good question. It took 2.5 years of production when we actually got the money, but then before that it took us 8 years to get the money. Since Neil and I have been involved, but the original producer Sarah Radcliffe, she optioned the book off Michael Morpurgo 22 years ago. So for her, it's been insane. When I first met Neil and we started developing the film, his eldest son was about, I don't know, his voice hadn't broken. He was about 5 foot tall. Now he's 6'3", and it's mad amount. His kids, Neil's kids have grown up through this production. It's insane.
Can I just ask one last question? What advice would you give to anybody in the audience who is an aspiring storyteller stroke filmmaker?
I was just having this conversation with the lady on the bar downstairs. Make things. There's a great director called Jean-Pierre Jeunet. Anyway, and he said, make things and you will be happy. He's French. That is my French today. Make things and you will be happy. And I think that's true. Don't think I can't wait until I have this camera or this lens or this resolution or this, keep worrying about the equipment. Just make stuff with whatever you have, whether it's a phone or your parents' phone or a flick book or just writing a story, and then show it to people. That's the important thing. Show it to people you trust, your parents, your friends, and get their genuine reaction, because the reactions to it are how you learn whether your story's going across or not. That's what we have to go through. We have to show our work and get notes on it and so on. So yeah, just make stuff, show it, and if you thought something was tremendously funny and it isn't, or you thought something was tremendously dramatic and people are laughing, learn from that and then go make something the next weekend and just keep making stuff.
And also, when you're making stuff like that, you'll be doing most of it. So that gives you a broad spectrum of skills. But also, I think crucially, I always say, if you want to be a filmmaker, make sure you learn editing. And you will be doing that because no one else is going to do it for you when you start out. But the process of editing is really what films are, and that's when you can write an idea down on paper and you think, oh, this is brilliant, and then you can even storyboard it and draw it in panels. And you think, oh, you're scanning across it with your eyes, and you think, oh, that's really cooking. This is going to be great. And you put it on a timeline where you hit the play button, and therefore it's being controlled in terms of its speed of the experience, and it doesn't work, and it's not exciting, or it's just it's confusing. And those things is where you really learn, okay, well, I need to rearrange these panels here. I need to make this tighter, quicker, or slower, let it have some breathing space. And I think that's when you really learn what films are, is when you edit your own films. So I would certainly recommend every wannabe director to edit. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much.